Okay, then. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to ULT San Diego, here for the Aquarian series. This afternoon, the title of the presentation is The Astrological Sign of Scorpio. And this will be given to us by Jonathan Colbert. And our chair for this evening is Desiree Van Sanen. Before we begin, a reading from the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna asks the question, by what, O descendant of Vrishni, is man propelled to commit offenses, seemingly against his will and as if constrained by some secret force? Krishna. It is lust which instigates him. It is passion sprung from the quality of rajas, insatiable and full of sin. Know this to be the enemy of man on earth. As the flame is surrounded by smoke and a mirror by rust, and as the womb envelops the fetus, so is the universe surrounded by this passion. By this, the constant enemy of the wise man, formed from desire, which rageth like fire and is never to be appeased, is discriminative knowledge surrounded. Its empire is over the senses and organs, the thinking principle, and the discriminating faculty also. By means of these, it cloudeth discrimination and deludeth the Lord of the body. Therefore, O best of the descendants of Bharata, at the very outset, restraining thy senses, thou should conquer this sin, which is the destroyer of knowledge and of spiritual discernment. The senses and organs are esteemed great, but the thinking self is greater than they. The discriminating principle is greater than the thinking self, and that which is greater than the discriminating principle is he. Thus, knowing what is greater than the discriminating principle and strengthening the lower by the higher self, do thou of mighty arms slay this foe which is formed from desire and is difficult to seize. Thus, in the Upanishads called the Holy Bhagavad Gita, in the science of the Supreme Spirit, in the book of devotion, in the colloquy between Holy Krishna and Arjuna, stands the third chapter by name, devotion through the right performance of action. We give you our own Jonathan Colbert.
Well, thank you, Monica, very much. So today we're going to talk about the astrological sign of Scorpio. And many people have commented that in some ways it's the most interesting one. They're all interesting. But Scorpio is really something. And it seems to force us to confront ourselves. And it tackles a topic that we all know something about. We kind of live in it. It's called desire. But it also has to do with the purification of desire. So it gives us a way out and a way through, you could say. And it helps us address the most existential problems of relationships, of the question of love, and the purification of love, and it also leads us into this very sublime realm that has to do with the topic of Fohat. So this symbol here of Scorpio is this scorpion here. He's quite a guy. Look at him there. And does anybody know the difference between, or I know what can, what category are scorpions and spiders in? Arachnid. Okay. There you go. And they're both arthropods, meaning that they have their skeleton on the outside. And what's the difference between an arachnid and an insect?
Number of legs, 8 versus 6.
Yep, 6 legs. And insects, and then arachnids have 8. And one of the differences between arachnids and scorpions, spiders and scorpions, because arachnids, another thing characteristic of them is they have these kind of segmented bodies, like this guy. And spiders, the ones that have a sting to them, some kind of venom, they have fangs. But scorpions, how do they do their sting? They do with that big old tail thing. And so there's drama already in Scorpio, just looking at this thing here. The quote from Hermes in the Almanac reads, "In Scorpio, the serpent begins to uncoil in the human constitution." We'll start off with some of the basic principles of theosophical astrology. And to me, the 3 fundamental propositions, they're like the scaffolding of theosophical thought. And they're like guiding principles to help unlock all of these mysteries. And yes, these are the 3 propositions of theosophy, but you can see as you read these how they would pertain to astrology, because astrology is this big life system, but it's all based on unity. So the first proposition talks about, these are all like principles of dynamic unity, and the first proposition is that unity itself is an abstract yet living principle. It's boundless, eternal, it's omnipresent, but it's beyond words and thought. It contains, sustains, and is everything. It's the great breath, it's life itself. And then another basic principle in theosophy and in theosophical astrology is that it's a universe of law. There's nothing chance anywhere. And unity here is expressed in circles and cycles, spirals, and in undulation and vibration. And examples of this are karma and reincarnation. And then a third basic principle of theosophy and of theosophical astrology is that everything is alive. Everything visible, everything invisible, everything complex, everything simple, everything is alive. And unity is expressed here in that there's everything is undergoing a universal pilgrimage of learning. And the whole purpose for everything in life is to learn. So that's your basics of theosophical astrology. Now, this chart here I put together, the left vertical column and the middle vertical column, I put it together from T. Subba Rao. And he has all the Sanskrit names for the astrological signs, and then he includes the Western names also. And then on the right, these are the Buddhist Nidanas that correspond to the 12 signs. And you'll see here that for Scorpio, number 8 here, it's tanha, craving and thirst. And that evolves out of the sign prior, which is Vedana and sensation. So much of the tanha and the craving has to do with our interpretation of sensation. Here is a simple truth. The zodiac in theosophical astrology symbolizes an entire cosmic cycle of evolution and dissolution. The zodiacal signs are ideographs and hieroglyphs with number, color, and tone. So it's really a journey. I like to think of that it's kind of a journey through the nidanas in a way, the astrological signs. The astrological signs are inseparable from these nidanas. And these nidanas represent opportunities for learning and opportunities for growth, but they also represent challenge. But no pain, no gain. So getting to Scorpio, there are some fundamental basics that many of us know already. For example, it's ruled by the planet Mars. It's under the element of water. The modality is it's a fixed modality. And the nidana, as we've mentioned, is tanha, craving, and thirst. Now, you'll find that much of this talk going forward is this student leaning very heavily on an article entitled Scorpio by Dr. Helen Valborg. And in that article, she identifies archetypes. And we'll see if we can find some of these archetypes as we proceed through the slides ahead. The heart of the scorpion, the archetype of the reservoir, of the wisdom heart, of lightning. There's the archetype of separation, the archetype of awakened Indran Fohat, and then there's the idea of philosophic death. All of these are in Scorpio. Now, one thing that I like about Dr. Valborg's writings is that she is obviously a master student of the secret doctrine, while also being a master student of astrology. And she also, to me, is able to have what I call a dialectical mobility in different levels of archetypes, all the way from the Platonic archetypes of the great forms, as Plato would call them. And these are like abstract universal ideas, all the way down to the Jungian archetypes of myth and fable and the different kinds of characters that you find in myths and everything in between. And there's three people that I can think that can straddle all the way from Plato to Jung. It's just in my head right now, and that's Dr. Valborg, H.P. Blavatsky, and Ursula Le Guin. And why Ursula Le Guin is such an amazing writer to me, because she, like Dr. Valborg, Ursula Le Guin was raised by, well, they're both grounded in cultural anthropology. And in Ursula Le Guin's case, she was raised by two anthropologists. So she grew up living and breathing this stuff. So to be able to effortlessly compare cultures and to synthesize cultures and to just like pull off the shelf an archetype here or an archetype there to create an image and a teaching and instruction, like in the Wizard of Earthsea, for example, is something pretty quite marvelous. And again, nothing is true or untrue because somebody says so. A lot of things are interesting because somebody says so. And a lot of things are even valuable. But that's an individual choice. Now, the reading that Monica read so beautifully included this passage here from the Gita in chapter 3. As the flame is surrounded by smoke and a mirror by rust, and as the womb envelops the fetus, so is the universe surrounded by this passion. By this, the constant enemy of the wise man, formed from desire, which rages like fire and is never to be appeased, is discriminative knowledge surrounded. It's another way of saying in theosophy, there's a very arcane teaching talking about the rounds and the races. And this idea that we are in the fourth round, which is the plane of kama and desire, it's very telling. And that's probably why everything we find is enveloped by passion and desire, really. And so we will be calling on the council, and as does Helen Valborg, of somebody who is not in the fourth round, namely Plato. So you go to the higher round if you want to get perspective on this one. And HPB said that he was a fifth rounder, which has to do with manas and clear thinking in this higher perspective. Now we have the slide here of the constellation of Antares, and that's very much associated with Scorpio. And it's the constellation of Scorpio, rather. And this star, Antares, is a giant red star, apparently. And it's many hundred times larger than our sun, for example. And it's a red star, and in that way, it has to do with passion and desire, at least in ancient mythology and tradition and lore. Now, we also have a picture of Mars here. This is not trying to say that Mars is bigger than Antares. This is just a picture of Mars on the same slide, but it's also something that has been associated by antiquity is having to do with Scorpio and this idea of passion and desire. Now, it may sound like I'm being kind of hard on passion. And this quote from the Gita is, "We hope to redeem passion and desire, redeem it as the presentation goes on." Now, in the same slide, we also have this quote from Plato from the Symposium. And this is also talking about how dicey this topic is, this topic of Scorpio is, and about how complicated and multivalent this topic of love actually is. And from the Symposium, hoarfrost and hail and blight spring from the excesses and disorders of this element of love, which to know in relation to the revolutions of the heavenly bodies and the seasons of the year is termed astronomy. Furthermore, all sacrifices and the whole province of divination, which is the art of communion between gods and men, these, I say, are concerned only with the preservation of the good and the cure of the evil love. So you can see the urgency of trying to figure out what's going on with love. It's this complicated thing. Now, this is the redemption part. The alchemists, they had a whole different idea on Scorpio. They held Scorpio in very high regard, for they understood that only when the sun was in this sign could iron be transmuted into gold. Pretty critical, apparently. One of the archetypes on that slide that we showed before was this idea of a reservoir. It says from the article on Scorpio, from Aries through Libra, the creative life force has been operating externally. Okay? So remember, this is a journey through the nidanas and a journey through archetypes. From an involution and then through evolution. Scorpio is on the evolutionary arc. So, from Aries through Libra, the creative life force has been operating externally. You could call that the path of poverty, outgoing, forthgoing. And with Libra, you have the path of nivriti, of return. And in Scorpio, this creative life force becomes indrawn to form a reservoir of energy for the soul's later efforts. Now, can I explain that? No, but it's very mysterious. Here's an interesting quote from the very end of the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 18. This is a reminder that this whole journey has to do with the very existential reality of our being. It's what we're made of to partake of this journey. And Krishna counsels, he says, if indulging self-confidence thou sayest, I will not fight, such a determination will prove itself vain, for the principles of thy nature will impel thee to engage. So, learning to understand these principles within that we all have is a matter of engagement, of embracing the journey, at least according to Krishna. Dr. Valborg writes, I wonder what it says under that bar.
Well, it says Fohat and the creative dialectic. So on the Zoom land, they don't see the.
Thank you.
Dr.
Dr. Valborg writes, the motive power of evolution is Fohat, which ever works in an undulating motion. It's a creative dialectic between the latent and the active, the ascending and the descending. And here we have the glyphs of Taurus, the Leo, of Scorpio, and Aquarius. And she writes that Scorpio's hieroglyphic symbol is that of a serpent and is illustrated in various forms in the glyphs for Taurus, where the energy is latent, Leo, where it's activated, Scorpio, where it is fully awake, and ultimately Aquarius, where its duality is transcended. You can see that in these glyphs here. So this is also a journey of awakening, of really Fohat within us. In Scorpio, this serpent is poised and ready to strike. Kind of like that tail on the scorpion. And with its awakening, Fohat compels and must be brought under control. Remember, Arjuna is saying, what is this force which seems to compel everything? In Scorpio, the serpent begins to uncoil in man and stretch up through the wheels or chakras corresponding to the various plexuses of the body until it finally reaches the third eye of Shiva, wherein man recovers his sense of the eternal. But there's a healing. From the solar plexus, the vital force is awakened when stung by the dagger of desire. And by ascending to the realm of the higher mind, it can help to heal the wound inflicted by itself. Scorpio affirms its role as that which stings and electrifies consciousness, awakening the soul to the task at hand. So we have this stinging electrification and then comprehension of the task at hand. It seems like that in our society, I was just talking about this with Vijay, it's so confusing what people's duty is for themselves. Everybody's having a hard time coming to terms with duty. Now we get into the division of the sexes, which is where we recruit Plato to give us a little bit of help. In Scorpio, the separated self has become a well-defined center enclosed by a wall. Aha, that was one of the archetypes, if I remember right, separation. It marks the soul's objectification of the self under the aegis of conceptual consciousness. Because I can think of a concept, for some reason I'm separate now. That's a pretty tricky piece of logic, which isn't necessarily true. This separation is epitomized in the division of the sexes, which accentuates the fall of unified spirit into the diversity of matter. This is where it starts getting dicey. Scorpio dramatizes this truth, especially for the greatest desires and difficulties arise from the seeming separation that subsists between man and woman. I told you it's going to get dicey. Plato taught of a time when man was one whole spherical being which craved not itself, but rested content in its completeness. But it came to pass that this being divided into halves, each becoming separated from the other, each doomed to suffer longing and discontent while searching for its other half. What a predicament. It is this anguished state of consciousness that Scorpio represents when men and women seek the lesser eros. Apparently, in seeking, there's different levels of eros, different levels of fohat, different levels of desire. You know, there's worldly desire, there's divine eros, for example. In seeking the lesser eros, apparently, it makes things even more complicated. And then it leads to antagonism between the sexes. But it's artificial. The artificial antagonism that exists between the sexes is aggravated by alternating waves of craving and pain, which envelop all earth-ground love and ensure its inevitable frustration. Craving is born in the longing for a completeness which can never be found externally in the world, while pain is the child of an ancient wound brought about by the apparent loss of one's wholeness. And then this happens. Each half of the once whole sphere looks for its other half. Each sex looks to the other, and in so doing, blames the other for its sense of loss, its incompleteness. How many times have we said, see how you are? While men and women crave one another in this faltering and futile manner, they simultaneously blame one another for being the painful reminder of their own lack of wholeness, their loss of innocence that is synonymous with the radiant purity of oneness. Here's a paragraph from Raghavan Iyer that talks about a very sacred conception of sexuality. Can I ask somebody to read this? Monica, would you?
The potency of tapas. Sexuality in the classical Hindu conception is bound up with the entire person. It is a sacred language which cannot be severed from the total state of selfhood. In Indian thought, all energies are distinguished by their expansive or constrictive operation and by the motive which directs them. Intelligently directed, they manifest at lower levels of heterogeneity their ideal counterparts. Man seeks to reverse this process so as to realize blissful reunion with the divine. This requires a sacrifice of temporal and spatial identity for a greater self-reference, which is unconfined by form and place. But energy must be refined within the alembic of pure vision and constant aspiration if it is to be alchemized. When the power of love is dissipated through indulgence in insatiable desire, the transformation cannot occur. Shiva, the regenerator, the greatest lover, and the sovereign ascetic, redeems all beings with unbounded compassion because he is attached to no particular form. He is the master of tapas, self-conquest through meditation.
Thank you, Monica, very much. This is something that really has to be kind of meditated on, this whole paragraph, but there's just so much here. But it has to do with the refinement of energy. Just leave it at that. And there's such a thing as a dissipation of energy on lower planes. And there's also such a thing as the non-dissipation of lower energy on lower planes, such that it can be stored and refined and becomes part of our future growth, apparently. So it has to do with transmutation. The conquering of Trishna. Who knows what Trishna is? Yes, thirst, right? Within the battlefield of the human heart requires the transmutation of the energy of desire. The alchemists knew this well and held Scorpio in high regard, for they understood that only when the sun was in this sign could iron be transmuted into gold. The fact that I have the same slide twice is deliberate. Now, there is a teaching in the Voice of the Silence about both Tanha and Trishna. And remember, Tanha is the Nidana for Scorpio. And in the Voice, it says, kill out desire, but if thou killest it, take heed, lest from the dead it should again arise. I think this whole exercise in thinking through Scorpio makes this section in the Voice possible. Kill love of life, but if thou slayest Tanha, let this not be for thirst of life eternal, but to replace the fleeting by the everlasting. See how the thirst for life eternal is about me? Whereas the replacing of the fleeting by the everlasting is really about humanity, to make yourself the better able to help and teach others. Now, Tanha has to do with the will to live, it says in the footnote here. It's the fear of death and the love for life, that force or energy which causes the rebirths. And it makes one able to say with St. Paul, O death, where is thy sting? If a person is really fearless. There's this archetype of the lightning strike. Fohad is indrawn in Scorpio and released in Sagittarius. And if desire is gathered up into the higher centers, see, remember that? The refinement and then the storage. The enclosing wall of the separated self can be shattered by the lightning strike of Uranus, the scorpion's powerful sting. Now enter Uranus, which has to do with dissolution. I think I understand that. The volcanic force of Uranus, the breaker of bonds, is especially strong in Scorpio. And when indrawn and conserved within this sign, it can release a power which may burst the strongest personal fortification. So we build these forts around ourselves. You know, like, don't attack me. I want to be safe, right? And but that needs to be dissolved through an alchemical transmutation. This mysterious force is the usable material of alchemical transmutation, and its subtle refinement within the lotus chakras of the human temple can tap the reservoir of the wisdom heart and activate the eye of wisdom, the eye of Shiva. This is why the alchemists are very intrigued by this sign of Scorpio. Now, Helen Valborg goes into this discussion about prajna and upaya. And she talks about the tradition of Buddhist sacraments. And she writes, in this tradition of the Buddhist sacraments, the whole world is said to be divided into a passive mental womb element and an active material diamond element, or into infinite combinations of wisdom and compassion, prajna and upaya. They represent the converging currents flowing within the individual, and their perfect detached balance alone releases the highest phohatic energy. Phohat is released by this mystic marriage of wisdom and compassion. So then, if you have prajna and upaya, you can have the single word of prajnopaya. The pure reflection of prajnopaya at the individual level is extremely difficult to realize, and the attempt to achieve it through external manipulations is detrimental and even dangerous. The magical power of sacramental exercises lies in the fact that they must be carried out mentally with a concentration of feeling, which involves the sublimation of emotion by means of meditation upon the transcendental significance of the act of communion, concordant unity of wisdom and compassion, prajna upaya. Now, a sacrament is like a ritual. We think that this has to do with a process through which one takes the mind and thinks things through, and thus cleanses emotion in the process. Like, for example, I'm thinking there's a sutra in Buddhism called the Prajnaparamita Sutra, and there's an instruction to Suryagarbha, which means the seat of the sun. And he talks about, or they, or whoever the instructor is, the preceptor, talks about if you could really think through shunyata, then you would really think through interdependence. Shunyata has something to do with it. There's nothing that stands alone by itself. Everything is connected and dependent on everything else. If you really think that through, then you'll become like the sun. You'll start shedding light to everybody without partiality. You'll warm the hearts of others. you'll warm the seeds that are latent in other human beings unconditionally in all direction. You become like the sun, for example. And by thinking this kind of thing through, you become strengthened in what they call the armor of Virya, for example. Okay, you become strengthened as a human being in the service of others. So this could be like a sacrament, you could say, thinking this kind of thing through. There's much in the voice of silence that we're invited to think through about the suffering of humanity and so forth, and how that has to do with the seed of enlightenment, and why one might want to take the pledge of Kuan Yin, for example. Let me go to another slide here. So it has to do with directing psychic energy. The central problem of the spiritual life is dynamic. It is not only a matter of theoretical understanding, but also one of practical exercises in directing psychic energy. I think I just gave one. This latter is essentially the energy of cosmic desire. And that's very important to understand, that all psychic energy that we have is really the energy of cosmic desire. That's where it all derives from. All Kama comes from Kamadeva. That's the root. This latter is essentially the energy, oh, I already read that. And everyday emotion is an exaggerated and wasteful way of expressing it. So we waste so much of our energy with just emoting. This is kind of an invitation to think twice about that. Once again, meditation and self-study. What the Buddha seeks to do through sacramental exercise, and as whatever their spiritual disciplines foster through varied psychological and devotional methods, is to facilitate the concentration and sublimation of feeling in the heart, and its subsequent conservation and redirection of emotional expenditure of energy. So we're invited to seize the flame. The destruction that flows from the restless force of desire brings sorrow in abundance. But the man who seizes the flame of Trishna, isn't that interesting? The Trishna, the thirst, is like a flame. The man who seizes the flame of Trishna and stores its fiery liquid within his heart creates in himself a sacred altar, which may attract others in search of a deific vision. So, in storing that wisdom heart, that desire to help others, the sublimation of desire, and that unconditional wish of benediction towards all, that creates a magnetism within your heart. And it's like a sacred altar, which may attract others in search of a deific vision. In this way, Trishna can be quenched, tanha may be stilled, and the insane longings of human existence seen for what they truly are. When this is calmly completed, this alchemical experiment in truth, man may proceed with the sacred task of preserving the pure love, the compassionate ray that springs upward from bodhicitta and illumines the whole world. I think that's it. You want to put the slides back up, Desiree, and go through them, or how do you want to do this?
Let's look at everyone.
Okay,
to be able to see our
Yeah.
audience out there.
Yeah, makes sense. Oh, and Hannah or Vijay,
Yeah, you think you can kind of pan out the camera a little bit so that they can see both
put
me
it-
and Desiree?
Can you put it
If
on?
I stand there, that's not good, right?
Well, let's. How do I? operate this so I can see everybody. It's different from my system. Just put it on view all.
Oh yeah, right?
Yeah, put on gallery or something. Or
Yep, good idea.
view all.
Gallery.
There you go.
Go.
That was
Everybody's being humble.
okay. We just I'll keep it where it's at. He and I are about 2 feet in different height. So
What do we do? Because then I'm standing in front of the thing if I stand over there.
oh, okay, you're fine. Well, first of all, it's a wonderful presentation. I love this is the book that was referenced. I don't know if anybody can see it. So I would strongly suggest if anyone's interested in this type of topic to please consider getting Theosophical Astrology, Helen Wahlberg and others. William Quan Judge, HPB, and Ragmat I are also cited. But thank you so much, because for me to be able to understand the astrology, I have to understand it from archetypes. I have a difficult time understanding them simply from personalities. So this helps me to understand the personality if I can go from the archetypes to the personalities. And she does this so well. And it was so well presented by you. Thank you so much. Are there any questions out there or in the audience? We have quite a few people in our physical audience here. I'll go ahead. I see
Robert?
Robert, are you muted? You can go ahead with your question.
Yes, you were going to tell us about the positive aspect of desire, I believe, Jonathan. That aspect, I guess, that doesn't have to do with tanha. Is there such a thing?
I'm saying that if you allow yourself to be dominated by desire and try and satiate something which is insatiable, that's going to paint all kinds of trauma within yourself. And there's this idea in Scorpio of actually stinging not only others, but yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like sometimes we look at somebody and say, that person's kind of nice, but I think they're their own worst enemy. Sometimes we say that about ourselves too. So in other words, you can just go down. But if a person steps away for a minute and realizes that all desire comes from something very cosmic and universal, and it's really rooted in the divine eros and kamadeva, that I think is the redeeming side of it. And that's why the alchemists hold Scorpio in such high esteem, according to this article, because there's the challenge. There's the wheel rubber hits the road when it comes to life.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just being theoretical. There's something about desire that forces us to wake up and to become a manasa.
And aren't there different degrees of desire? I mean, what would be pure desire? I mean,
What do you think?
Well, when I think of Kamadeva, I think of the desire that arose in it,
Mm-hmm.
and that desire that arose in it to do what? To learn, to awaken, to know itself. I think of the universe trying to know itself, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That there's a compulsion that we experience on a minor scale every time we wake up in the morning. We don't force ourselves to wake up. Well, usually we don't. I mean, we have a natural compulsion to do that. It's not something that is mechanical. It's a natural process. And to me, that's a part of how the universe wakes itself up to know itself. And we do that as that same archetype does. We're the same archetype. So when I think of that higher compulsion, to me, that is that Kamadeva coming out. I do have a question,
Yeah,
but I don't know if I should have. JP, do you want to ask your question first? Go ahead. We have more people over here.
Sure, thank you. So, Jonathan, you mentioned the scorpion sting that could break down all the fortifications built around a personal ego as a defensive wall. And what would that sting be like? What kind of force would that be? What is it that could break down the defensive structures of a personal ego?
Yeah, well, this is where kind of the group discussion might be really valuable. Different people have different things to offer. One thing that occurs to me, like in your basic Psychology 101 textbook, it'll talk about mental mechanisms of defense in big bold letters in front of 3 paragraphs. And it's talking about all the things that we do. You know, we project, we do this, we do all kinds of stuff. Not me, we compensate, we do everything to protect that ego, that fragile ego. We spend so much of our time and energy protecting this supposed ego. Gymnastics. You know, I mean, super acrobatic things that we do to protect the ego. And it's interesting, like in there's this document that Theosophists refer to now and then called the Great Master's Letter. And the really important thing that guru in that presentation is trying to emphasize, we have to get rid of this ego. And yes, we can learn all kinds of things and get all kinds of degrees. But this is just a tool that we can live our life with, you know. But ultimately, our sense of identity, we have to expand that and universalize identity. You know, draw the larger circle of our field of inclusion. Now, there is a thing in the Light and the Path where it refers to this annual, it's almost like one of these Buddhist sacraments. It's an annual initiation, or it's an annual something, and it has to do with learning to become defenseless, where a person says, no longer am I going to protect myself. I'm just going to lay all that stuff down. I'm going to lay my arms down, you know, and it's just not necessary. And I can be like a child, and I'm going to learn. It's like in Shantideva in his ordination, where he talks about joining the Buddha family and all this. But one of the things he talks about is, if somebody criticizes me or makes fun of me or mocks me or laughs at me, they are my guru. They are my teacher. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine being able to do that? Mm-hmm. Now, as far as the sting thing going on, the only thing I got for that, and I hope that others will help, is it has to do with this this Uranus element, where it has to do with the breaker of bonds. And I think the article kind of cited that connection between the sting and the Uranus element. And I don't know much about that, but it does have to do with awakening. And sudden awakening, there is a sting to it, isn't it? It's like, oh my gosh, where have I been? You know? But maybe the questioner has something to add to that or subtract.
Negative.
Just quick, Monica.
Yes, please have patience with me trying to put this question together. I would like to make sure I understand something that you said. First of all, it was a great presentation, and thank you so much, Jonathan. Just wonderful. But you started talking with one of the slides about the what goes on between couples who say, you look at what you've done, or you've done this, or this sort of mirroring without realizing that that's exactly what you're doing in a relationship. And then there was a slide that seemed to talk about the student, let's say, needing to have this union between the female and male aspect of their being, so that that influence or that tendency is somehow lessened. And so I think it was meditation, or you spoke up briefly, but basically I'm wanting to know if that is actually called the idea in name somehow, this practice of blending the inner male with the inner female, which has nothing to do with the external, in the universal sense I'm speaking, so that we're less, which we don't seem to be accomplishing this in this time with the great issues that are going on in terms of gender. But is this practice something that will bring us to that universal perception of ourselves, so that tendency is lessened? Make any sense?
Oh, that's a lot of wisdom there. But Desiree, you did a good job one time when you were talking about this whole thing of what Plato was talking about the spherical thing, and then the dividing in half and all that stuff. Do you remember that? Or could you just help us with that?
I want to follow up with
Sure.
with what Monica said, and I wonder, as I was reading her book, and that section where it talks about that we're constantly in search of completeness.
Right. The soulmate syndrome.
Yeah. And it made me wonder, when it's separated during the, third and a half round, but from that point forward, could we say that's why we have so many isms going on in the world today, and schisms, and these, because it's not just between male and female, but I'm wondering if it extends from that.
Tribalism?
Well, any kind of divisionism, but does it extend from that core, extend from that origin of the separation of the sexes? Right. That was a curious thought that came to me when I read that section, and it's something to think about, because so much of what is in the world today is a problem with, again, the way women are treated. And I don't remember who it was who said, but you could tell that the degree of evolution of its society by the way I think he says by the way it treats your animals, but I think there was also children and women in there too. But that schism may lead to other schisms, is what I'm saying.
Yes,
Yeah, go ahead.
I would agree with that, Desiree, with this idea of the Kabbalistic Adam Kadmon being androgynous, and then there was later a separation, and then part of this, antagonism that the article talks about arises from that delusion of separateness. So first you have the delusion of separateness, and then you have the delusion of I'm only half of a separate thing, and you get more and more upset about that as we're searching for unity. And then it's interesting, as one of the slides said that the external world temporal unity can never be satisfactory. Yeah, it has to be, like Monica was saying, it has to occur on the inner plane.
But you had one slide there, Jonathan.
About upaya and wisdom?
Yeah,
wisdom and compassion?
What's the term again?
Oh,
It was wisdom and compassion. Prajnopaya.
Pragnopaya.
Pragnopaya.
Wisdom and compassion. I have to think about that too, as being separated, male, female.
Mm-hmm. Well, which one's which?
Don't ask.
Well,
But because they're synthesized,
Judy-
really.
Judy has
Yes,
a question
Judy.
or comment?
she's got the answer.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. Does the awakening of the serpent in the human being symbolized by Scorpio have to do with the awakening of the Kundalini Shakti, which is a very powerful serpent power, and we better be prepared to control it,
That's the undulation.
such as the suppression of the desire for anything for our personal self, as you spoke about.
I think so. Matter of fact, I almost got a slide that showed that, but then I thought, I don't know. Because when you start getting into Kundalini, you're getting into some big stuff, but this whole topic is about that. So thank you for asking the question. I think the problem with Kundalini is that there's ways of activating it artificially and taking spiritual shortcuts. And you're playing with fire. But to understand that there's this gradual awakening that happens over large periods in one's life and over reincarnations, that is where you can bring philosophy into it. And it's safer, but it's also understanding the dynamics of the universe. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. And that this awakening probably has to do with John Powers' question about the sting and so forth. So you can see why Scorpio is so interesting to the alchemists. And this is why I brought in that slide about the very principles of your nature will compel you to act. Because it's what you're talking about. It's this awakening that is actually going on within our whole system, over time. So maybe others have anything to add to that.
David?
Oh, hi. Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, Scorpio is interested to the alchemist because Scorpio and alchemy is all about transformation.
Yes.
And that's really what Scorpio is about.
Yep.
I think one symbol, I thought I'd just throw it out. It was one that I don't think was mentioned tonight, but Scorpio is also, what is it? It's connected with the 8th house of the zodiac, correct?
Okay. I don't know about this.
Oh yeah. Well, it is. It's the 8th house in the zodiac. And
yes, the 8th. Yes, number 8. Yeah, sorry. That's
number 8.
That's clear. Yeah, because Aries is number 1, etc.
In terms of the 8th house being the house of transformation, it's totally connected with the phoenix.
Yeah.
Symbol of the phoenix.
Yeah, rising
which is all about death and rebirth and evolution, I guess you could say. Yes.
And that's why I tried to include that slide. Death, where is thy sting? It's like what seems to be death is really just a letting go and a renunciation and a transformation. But it's also about this word transmutation, which I think is even more specifically alchemical. Because transformation is something that kind of happened to you. Transmutation is something that you've got to really embrace and really take on. So you can see that these alchemists who are turning iron into gold or lead into gold and so forth, they were really, you have to be fearless to do that. And I think that's another thing that this topic is about. Thank you, David.
Yeah. Just one last thing on that then, transmutation, you were talking a lot about desires. Well, isn't that the process of transmutation raising the vibratory rate of desire? Moving more to the higher level of that desire that first arose in it, or however you want to, term it.
By the way, David, I thought of a little bit of an answer to your question that you asked me about 3 weeks ago about meditation, and it had to do with vibration and why meditation has to do with discrimination. You have to be able to meditate in order to have discrimination, because you have to be able to reach a certain altitude that's higher than any two things that you're discriminating between in order to achieve that perspective. And it would seem that that would be something that would be required to do the transformation of the vibratory rate of desire. You have to be able to discover something that's higher, at a higher transcendental point from which to work. It just seems like.
Betty? Are you there, Betty?
Hi,
You're on.
yes. Hi. Yes. So yeah, I also thought that was a great point, David, and you made. I did. So the interesting things about that point that Monica pointed out, that is also like one of those classic. Is that like the comment that like Socrates or Plato made, that the boulder is split in half? But also there's this thing, and I know I've mentioned it before, but like in the Pistis Sophia, they mentioned that creation of the highest beings actually do require gender, male and female, to come together, and that the way this world was created was through these angels of the 13th realm called Syzygy. So I don't know if that relates to Scorpio, because I know in like the idea that David also said the Scorpios.
You cut out, Betty.
Did she accidentally mute herself?
Yeah, she might have. Something happened.
We don't
hear
you. It doesn't have the red on.
We have somebody really strong on Plato in this room, Judy. Would you mind telling us about this whole thing about Plato and that we were, the round beings that are really both androgyne, right? And then that whole splitting, and then each side, etc. Can you have anything to tell us about that?
Oh, I got cut off for a second. I just wanted to finish that point. Was that the Scorpio was seen also? It's supposed to be Scorpio, Eagle, Phoenix, and then Thunderbird. And Thunderbirds are sometimes attributed to some of the angelic beings, either like what someone was mentioning before, not necessarily serpents, but along that line. Like, I don't want to give Nephilim all a bad name, but something like the angelic beings that fell. So I don't know if that's all related in some way, but anyway, thank you.
Very technical what you're talking about, but there is this idea of the fall into matter. But anyway, I think we're almost out of time here. So is anybody has one last question or point or anything? Judy, were you going to help us with the Plato thing?
Oh, yes, in Plato, you're talking about the third speech in a symposium where Aristophanes, who's quite drunk at the time, is almost presenting this as a joke. Wasn't man much more powerful, being circular and had more legs and too powerful, so Zeus had to cut him in half, and he's been looking for his other half ever since. That's a soulmate. Well, isn't this an allegory of the earlier races were in a different form?
Yes.
When matter was in a different form.
Yes.
And the circle perhaps is more representative of the soul rather than the physical body we're in now. But of course, our heads are egg-shaped, rather circular. And so I think this symbolism is really very powerful if you take it as an allegory.
Yes.
Not literally.
It has so much to it.
Yeah.
And it even goes into this idea that one of the archetypes is separation. You even have the separation of the signs involved here, because there was a time when there was really only 10. Dave talked about 8th house and so forth, meaning that there's 12. there was a time when there was only 10. There's a mystery in that. You have Libra and you have Virgo, Libra, Scorpio. They were all one thing, but now they're separate.
Mhm.
But then there's another mystery in the reunification. It becomes the end of the cycle if that happens. So in other words, this separation apparently is necessary for growth. So that whole thing about you're talking about, Judy, that allegory is deep in a lot of different directions. It seems like there's a lot there. And there's a mystery in the article talking about how there's a kind of an analogy there to gestation, because the fetus is really pretty mature at 7, but then it's not ready to come out until 9. So there's this mystery between 7 and 9 and all that there. But that's just saying that there's a mystery.
And the mind.
Yeah.
She also speaks about cognition in a certain way.
Oh yeah.
So even though the body is ready at some point, you know, it takes a lot more time for the mind to become actually aware or can cognize itself. Because even though it's almost like coming out of a dream where things are separate, but that mind is still connected. But I think there's a point where they actually have to cognize the separation. So she does make that analogy to gestation, saying that is the archetype.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
it's just so deep that I couldn't really, but yeah, thank you so much. Desiree, thank you so much.
No, my pleasure. This was so enjoyable. And first of all, are there any questions or comments in the audience that's physically here?
Just to get to say,
Yeah.
wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Oh,
Okay.
very kind.
We got a lot of affirmatives in the audience. So I just want to thank again our dear friend over here, Jonathan Colbert, for his excellent presentation, and also to encourage folks to stop by next Saturday, 4:30 Pacific time.
On the ascending cycle, right?
Exactly, on the ascending cycle.
By the way, that's about George William Russell. And it's about the second half of the Secret Doctrine.
Oh, we need.
But the George William Russell, and we have somebody who's very good at talking about George William Russell. He was the Irish Theosophist. He was an editor of a magazine called the Irish Theosophist, and he was a colleague, let's say, of William Q. Judge.
Another.
Yeah, right.
All right. So you know the machine that
Oh,
anybody.
okay. Well, thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you all for coming, and enjoy your evening.
Have a good week.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Namaste.
Namaste to all. I'm not exactly.
Guess I'll just do this. Eventually it does.